The first gunshot scattered the mourning doves from the cottonwood trees as Ruby Calloway limped down the main street of Redemption Springs, her once white petticoat caked with desert dust and dried blood. It was 1878, and the small Arizona Territory town was just waking up. Saloon doors still locked, and the general store's windows yet to be unshuttered. Ruby's left boot dragged through the dirt as she struggled forward, one hand pressed against her side where a bullet had grazed her ribs, the other clutching a weathered leather satchel containing everything she owned in the world. Vaughn Sutherland watched her from beneath the wide brim of his Stetson, taking a long drag from his cigarette as he leaned against the hitching post outside the telegraph office. He'd ridden into town just yesterday after 2 months on a cattle drive, his pockets heavy with pay and his body aching for a real bed. But something about the limping woman caught his eye, the proud tilt of her chin despite her obvious pain, the determined set of her shoulders, and the careful way she scanned each building as though searching for something or someone. "You need a doctor, madam," Vaughn called out, dropping his cigarette and grinding it beneath his boot heel. Ruby's head snapped up, eyes narrowing with distrust. "I need to mind my own business, and I suggest you do the same," she replied, her voice stronger than her injured frame suggested. Vaughn straightened to his full height, nearly 6 feet of weathered muscle and sinew. His dark hair curled beneath his hat, and his blue eyes studied her with quiet intensity. "There's only one doctor in Redemption Springs, and you're headed in the wrong direction." Ruby hesitated, her breath catching on a wince. "I'm not looking for a doctor. I'm looking for work. You'll find more undertakers than employers walking that way," Vaughn said, nodding toward the path she was taking, which led to the seedier end of town. "Let me help you." "I don't need," Ruby started, but her knees buckled. She would have fallen if Vaughn hadn't crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, catching her elbow to steady her. "You were saying?" he asked, the hint of a smile touching his lips. Ruby looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time. His face was tanned from the sun, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting across open plains. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, when they touched her arm, were calloused but gentle. "Fine," she conceded, too exhausted to argue. "Where's this doctor?" Vaughn fell into step beside her, shortening his stride to match her limping gait. "2 blocks down across from the church. Name's Doc Miller. Good man, doesn't ask too many questions." Ruby nodded but said nothing more as they made their slow progress down the street. Shopkeepers were beginning to open their doors, and a few early risers tipped their hats to Vaughn, casting curious glances at the injured woman by his side. "You got a name?" Vaughn asked after they'd walked half a block in silence. "Ruby," she answered after a moment's hesitation. "Ruby Calloway, Vaughn Sutherland. Most folks call me Sutherland or just Cowboy. I work for the Diamond Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of here." Ruby's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "And do you make a habit of helping strange women in the street, Mr. Sutherland?" "Only the ones who look like they might have an interesting story to tell," he replied, his expression serious despite his light tone. When they reached Doc Miller's office, Vaughn rapped his knuckles against the door. After a moment, a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose opened it, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a coffee cup in hand. "Sutherland," the doctor greeted, then spotted Ruby. "What have we here?" "This is Miss Calloway. She could use some tending to," Vaughn explained. Doc Miller ushered them inside, directing Ruby to a wooden examination table. "What happened, young lady?" Ruby exchanged a glance with Vaughn, who nodded encouragingly. "I was shot," she admitted. "It's just a graze, but my ankle's been troubling me for days. Fell off my horse when it got spooked by a rattler." The doctor clucked his tongue as he helped her onto the table. "Let's have a look then." Vaughn moved toward the door. "I'll wait outside." "No," Ruby said suddenly, surprising herself. "You can stay, if you want to." Vaughn paused, then nodded, taking a seat on a wooden chair in the corner of the room. As Doc Miller examined Ruby's wounds, cleaning and bandaging the bullet graze and wrapping her swollen ankle, Vaughn watched her face. She barely flinched, even when the doctor dabbed alcohol on the raw wound at her side. "You've got grit, Miss Calloway," Doc Miller commented as he finished bandaging her ankle. "But you need to stay off this foot for at least a week. The bullet wound isn't serious, but it could become infected if you don't keep it clean." Ruby's face fell. "I can't afford a week of rest, doctor. I need to find work." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Vaughn asked. Ruby hesitated. "I can cook, so keep books." "I was a teacher back in Kansas before." She trailed off, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Before what?" Doc Miller prompted gently. Ruby shook her head. "It doesn't matter now, I just need a fresh start." Doc Miller looked thoughtful. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house was saying just yesterday she needs help with the cooking and cleaning. Her arthritis has been acting up something fierce." "I don't have money for boarding," Ruby admitted. "Room and board would be part of your wages, I expect," the doctor replied. "And it's respectable work for a young woman. Better than some alternatives in a town like this." Vaughn stood up. "I'll take you there once the doc's finished. Mrs. Patterson's a fair woman, tough as old leather but fair." Ruby studied him. "Why are you helping me?" Vaughn rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly self-conscious. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be a stranger in need of a helping hand." An hour later, after Doc Miller had given Ruby some powders for pain and strict instructions about caring for her wounds, Vaughn helped her down the steps of the doctor's office. He'd insisted on paying for the doctor's services, despite Ruby's protests. "Consider it a loan," he'd said when she objected. "You can pay me back when you're on your feet again." The morning sun was high now, bathing Redemption Springs in golden light. The town was fully awake, with horses and wagons moving along the main street and the chatter of commerce filling the air. Ruby leaned heavily on Vaughn's arm as they made their way to the boarding house, a two-story clapboard building with a wide front porch and window boxes filled with hardy desert flowers. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a stout woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a severe bun and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Vaughn's explanation of Ruby's situation, her gaze sweeping over the young woman's battered appearance. "Can you make a decent biscuit, girl?" she asked finally. Ruby nodded. "My mother taught me, and I can make bread, stews, pies, whatever you need." Mrs. Patterson pursed her lips. "I've got 6 regular boarders and 2 rooms I rent to travelers passing through. Breakfast is served at 6, dinner at 6 in the evening. Sundays we have a special dinner after church. You'll have your own room off the kitchen, small but private. 1 day off a week, usually Saturdays. $5 a month plus room and board." Ruby blinked in surprise. "That's generous." "It's fair," Mrs. Patterson corrected. "And I'm taking Vaughn's word that you're honest and hardworking. Don't make him a liar." "I won't," Ruby promised. Mrs. Patterson nodded. "You can start once that ankle's better. Until then, you can help with the mending and such while sitting down. Vaughn, help her to the back room, would you?" "I need to get lunch started for the boarders." As Vaughn guided Ruby through the boarding house to her new quarters, she murmured, "Thank you. I don't know why you're being so kind, but thank you." "You can thank me by telling me your story someday," he replied. "When you're ready." Ruby's room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the vegetable garden behind the house. Vaughn set her satchel on the bed. "I should let you rest," he said, lingering by the door. Ruby settled onto the edge of the bed. "Will I see you again?" Vaughn smiled, the expression transforming his weather-beaten face. "Count on it, Miss Calloway. I ride into town most Saturdays. Maybe once you're feeling better, you join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant. It's not fancy, but the food's good." Ruby found herself returning his smile. "I'd like that, Mr. Sutherland." True to his word, Vaughn returned the following Saturday. Ruby's ankle was still tender, but she'd been able to start some of her duties at the boarding house, sitting at the kitchen table peeling potatoes or rolling out pie dough while Mrs. Patterson handled the heavier work. The older woman was gruff but kind, and Ruby had quickly fallen into the rhythm of boarding house life. When Vaughn appeared at the back door, hat in hand and freshly shaved, Ruby felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. He traded his dusty work clothes for a clean shirt and his good boots, and his hair was still damp from washing. "Evening, Miss Calloway," he greeted her. "Thought I'd see if that dinner offer still stands." Ruby wiped her hands on her apron. "Let me change my dress. I'll just be a moment, Mrs. Patterson shooed her away from the kitchen. "Go on, girl. You've earned a night out." With the boarding house owner's help, Ruby changed into her one good dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Mrs. Patterson insisted on pinning Ruby's copper-red hair up in a more flattering style, and even produced a dab of rose-scented water for her wrists. "There," the older woman said, stepping back to survey her work. "You'll do." When Ruby emerged, Vaughn's eyes widened appreciatively. "You look lovely, Miss Calloway." Ruby blushed. "Thank you." The hotel restaurant was busy, but Vaughn had reserved a table by the window. As they ate, he told her about the Diamond Bar Ranch and his work as a trail boss, describing the vast herds of longhorn cattle and the grueling drives to railheads in Kansas. "I've been saving to buy my own place," he confided over apple pie. "Not a big spread, just enough land for a small herd and a decent house, somewhere peaceful." "That sounds wonderful," Ruby said softly. "A place of your own." "What about you?" Vaughn asked. "What brought you to Redemption Springs?" "And don't say the scenery, because there's prettier places than this dusty corner of the territory." Ruby stared at her plate for a long moment. "I was running," she finally admitted. "My husband was killed 6 months ago. The men who did it, they're still looking for me." Vaughn's expression darkened. "Why would they be after you?" Ruby took a shaky breath. "Robert, my husband, he was a banker in Wichita. He discovered that some of his associates were embezzling from the bank, stealing from people's savings. He was going to expose them, but they found out. They shot him in our home." Her voice broke. "I was there. I saw their faces. They tried to kill me too, but I managed to escape." Vaughn reached across the table, his calloused fingers covering hers. "I'm sorry, Ruby." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart catch. "I've been moving west ever since, staying ahead of them. They're determined to silence me." "You're safe here," Vaughn said firmly. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Ruby gave him a sad smile. "You can't promise that. You don't know what these men are capable of." "Then tell me," he urged. "Let me help you." Over the next hour, Ruby told Vaughn everything about the 3 men who had murdered her husband, about the evidence Robert had collected against them, evidence she now carried in a false bottom of her satchel, and about the close calls she'd had during her flight west. The bullet that had grazed her side had come from one of their guns just outside Albuquerque. "They're well connected," she explained. "One of them, James Blackwood, has friends in law enforcement across 3 states. I tried going to the authorities in the beginning, but word always got back to them. That's why I have to keep moving." Vaughn listened intently, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The territorial marshal in these parts is an honest man," he said finally. "Frank Hollister. I've known him for years. If anyone can help you bring these men to justice, it's him." Ruby shook her head. "I can't risk it. Not yet. I need time to build a new life, to find my footing." "Then that's what we'll do," Vaughn said simply. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore." As they walked back to the boarding house in the growing dusk, Vaughn kept his stride slow to match Ruby's limping gait. The streets of Redemption Springs were quieter now, with most of the respectable citizens at home and only the saloons doing brisk business. "Thank you for dinner," Ruby said as they reached the boarding house porch. "And for listening. I haven't told anyone the whole story before." "I'm glad you told me," Vaughn replied. "And I meant what I said. You're not alone now." Ruby looked up at him, studying his face in the soft glow of the porch lantern. On impulse, she rose on tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Vaughn." His eyes darkened. "Good night, Ruby." Over the next several weeks, as spring gave way to the heat of summer, Vaughn became a regular visitor at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson watched with knowing eyes as the young cowboy found increasingly creative reasons to ride into town from the Diamond Bar. Ruby's ankle healed, and she took on full duties at the boarding house, earning praise from Mrs. Patterson and the boarders for her cooking and quiet efficiency. Vaughn took her riding when her ankle was strong enough, showing her the beauty of the Arizona landscape beyond the town limits. He taught her to shoot a revolver, insisting she needed to protect herself, and brought her wildflowers he found on the range. Sometimes they just sat on the boarding house porch in the evening, talking until the stars emerged in the vast desert sky. "I never expected to find someone like you," Vaughn confessed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mesas in shades of gold and crimson. "Not out here." Ruby smiled. "I never expected to find anyone at all. After Robert died, I thought that part of my life was over." Vaughn took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "And now I'm not so sure," she admitted, her heart racing at his touch, but the peace couldn't last. 3 months after Ruby arrived in Redemption Springs, a stranger rode into town asking questions. Ruby was serving breakfast to the boarders when Mrs. Patterson hurried into the kitchen, her face grave. "There's a man at the general store," she said in a low voice. "Eastern clothes, fancy pistol. He's showing a photograph around, asking if anyone's seen a woman matching your description." Ruby's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. "They've found me." Mrs. Patterson squeezed her arm. "You go out the back way. Take the path behind the church to Vaughn's room at the Drover's Hotel. I'll send word to the ranch that you need him." Ruby packed her few belongings with shaking hands, tucking the precious evidence into the hidden compartment of her satchel. As she slipped out the back door of the boarding house, she caught a glimpse of a tall man in a black suit walking down the main street. Her blood ran cold. It was Howard Reeves, the most dangerous of her husband's killers. She kept to the alleys and back streets, her healed ankle allowing her to move quickly now. When she reached the Drover's Hotel, the desk clerk recognized her and immediately directed her to Vaughn's room. It was simple but neat, with a narrow bed and a view of the stables behind the building. Ruby paced the small room, jumping at every sound. Hours passed with no sign of Vaughn. Finally, as the afternoon shadows lengthened, there was a soft knock at the door. "Ruby." "It's me," Vaughn's voice called quietly. She flung open the door, relief flooding her as she saw him standing there, dusty from a hard ride. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him. Vaughn held her tight, his chin resting on top of her head. "I came as soon as I got word," he said. "Are you all right?" Ruby nodded against his chest. "For now, but they're here, Vaughn. I recognized one of them, Howard Reeves. If he's here, the others can't be far behind." Vaughn led her to sit on the edge of the bed, then pulled a chair close, taking her hands in his. "I've been thinking about this day since you told me your story," he said. "I have a plan, but you need to trust me." "I do trust you," Ruby said without hesitation. "I've spoken to Marshal Hollister," Vaughn revealed. "Not about you specifically, but about a hypothetical situation. He believes your evidence would be enough to arrest these men, especially with your testimony." Ruby's eyes widened. "You didn't tell him about me." "No, but I trust him, Ruby, and we're running out of options. These men won't stop coming after you." Ruby took a deep breath. "What's your plan?" "We draw them out," Vaughn explained. "Make them think you're leaving town tomorrow on the stage to Tucson. They'll try to stop you, and that's when we'll have them with the marshal and his deputies waiting." "It's dangerous," Ruby whispered. "It is," Vaughn agreed. "But living in fear is no life at all, and I want more for you, Ruby. I want more for us." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "Us," Vaughn swallowed hard. "I love you, Ruby Calloway. I think I've loved you since I saw you limping down that street, too proud to ask for help but too determined to give up. I want a future with you, but we can't have that with these shadows hanging over us." Tears filled Ruby's eyes. "I love you too," she admitted. "But I'm afraid, Vaughn. Not just for myself, but for you. These men, they're killers." "So am I when I need to be," Vaughn said grimly. "I fought in the war, Ruby. I know how to handle myself." In the end, Ruby agreed to Vaughn's plan. That night, they met secretly with Marshal Hollister, a grizzled veteran lawman who listened to Ruby's story with increasing anger. When she showed him the evidence her husband had collected, ledgers, forged documents, and a list of witnesses, he whistled low. "This is enough to send these men to the gallows," he confirmed. "But Sutherland's right, we need to catch them in the act to make sure they can't slither out of it." The trap was set. Word was deliberately leaked that Ruby would be taking the morning stage to Tucson. Vaughn would accompany her openly to the stage depot, making sure Reeves and his companions took notice. Ruby barely slept that night, curled against Vaughn's side in his hotel room. As dawn broke, she dressed in her traveling clothes, her hands steady despite her fear. Vaughn buckled on his gun belt, checking and rechecking his revolver. "Remember," he told her as they prepared to leave the hotel, "no matter what happens, stay inside the stage until the marshal gives the all clear." Ruby nodded, then surprised him by pulling his head down for a fierce kiss. "Come back to me," she whispered against his lips. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," he promised. They walked openly to the stage depot, Vaughn carrying Ruby's satchel. She could feel eyes watching them from the hotel across the street, where Reeves had taken a room. The stage was being prepared, the driver checking the harnesses while a shotgun messenger loaded mail bags. Marshal Hollister and his deputies were strategically positioned around the depot, dressed as ordinary townspeople. The plan was to let Reeves and his men make their move, then close the trap. Vaughn helped Ruby into the stage, then turned to shake the driver's hand, the signal that everything was in position. As he stepped back from the stage, a voice called out, "Miss Calloway, a moment of your time." Howard Reeves strode toward the stage, two men flanking him, the other murderers, Dayton and Ellis. All three had their hands hovering near their weapons. "We have unfinished business," Reeves said, his voice carrying across the now silent street. Vaughn moved to stand between them and the stage. "The lady's not interested in any business with you," Reeves sneered. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. Step aside." "I can't do that," Vaughn replied calmly. Reeves' eyes narrowed. "Then you'll die with her." What happened next unfolded in seconds. Reeves went for his gun, but Vaughn was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Reeves staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The other two men drew their weapons, but before they could fire, Shots rang out from all directions as the marshal and his deputies revealed themselves. "Drop your weapons," Marshal Hollister bellowed. "You're surrounded." Ellis panicked, firing wildly. A bullet grazed Vaughn's arm, spinning him around. Ruby screamed from inside the stage, watching in horror as blood bloomed on Vaughn's sleeve. Despite his injury, Vaughn raised his gun again, firing twice. Ellis fell, his gun clattering to the dirt. Dayton, seeing his companions down, threw his hands up in surrender. Within moments, the marshal and his deputies had the situation under control, disarming the wounded Reeves and securing Dayton in handcuffs. A deputy checked Ellis and shook his head. Vaughn's shots had found their mark. Ruby burst from the stage, rushing to Vaughn's side. "You're hurt." Vaughn grimaced, pressing his hand to the bloody groove in his arm. "It's just a scratch. Are you all right?" Ruby nodded, tears streaming down her face as the tension of the past months finally broke. "It's over. It's really over." Marshal Hollister approached them, his weathered face solemn. "You've got courage, both of you. Miss Calloway, we'll need your statement and that evidence, but these men won't be threatening anyone ever again." As Doc Miller tended to Vaughn's wound back at his office, Ruby sat beside him, refusing to let go of his hand. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Vaughn looked at her, his blue eyes clear despite the pain. "Now, Ruby Calloway, I'd like to properly court you if you'll allow it, and when you're ready, I'd like to make you my wife." Ruby's heart swelled with a joy she'd thought she'd never feel again. "I think I'd like that very much." Vaughn Sutherland. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Ruby Calloway became Ruby Sutherland in a simple ceremony at the Redemption Springs Church. Mrs. Patterson hosted the wedding breakfast at the boarding house, beaming with pride as if Ruby were her own daughter. Marshal Hollister stood as Vaughn's best man, and the entire town turned out to celebrate. With the reward money from the capture of Reeves and Dayton, plus the return of funds they had stolen, Vaughn was able to purchase the small ranch he'd been saving for 300 acres of good grazing land with a year-round stream and a modest but sturdy house. Ruby had insisted they name it Redemption Ranch, a testament to the second chance they'd both found. Their wedding night was spent in that house, with moonlight spilling through the windows and the promise of a future stretching before them like the endless Arizona sky. As they lay tangled in each other's arms, Ruby traced the scar on Vaughn's arm, a permanent reminder of the day they'd finally defeated her demons. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. "That day when I limped into town and you fell into step beside me." Vaughn kissed her, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "Never. That was the day my life truly began." Spring came to Redemption Ranch with a riot of wildflowers and the gentle bleating of new calves. Ruby stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swelling belly as she watched Vaughn ride in from checking the herd. The past year had brought healing and joy in equal measure, washing away the pain of everything that had come before. As Vaughn dismounted and walked toward her, his smile as warm as the Arizona sun, Ruby thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the loss, the fear, the desperate flight across the West with killers on her trail. She had arrived in Redemption Springs broken and limping, with nothing but determination and the clothes on her back. And then a cowboy had fallen into step beside her, and everything had changed. Vaughn climbed the porch steps and wrapped his arms around her, his hand joining hers on the curve of her stomach where their child grew. "How are my girls today?" he murmured against her hair. Ruby leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid strength of him. "We're perfect. Even better now that you're home." "Home," Vaughn repeated, the word filled with wonder. "I never really had one of those until you, Ruby." As the sun set over their land, painting the desert in gold and crimson, Ruby turned in her husband's arms to kiss him. The limp that had brought them together was long gone, but Vaughn remained steadfastly at her side, just as he had promised on that fateful day when a wounded woman had stumbled into town, and a cowboy had decided, in an instant that would define both their lives, to help her. "I love you, Vaughn Sutherland," Ruby whispered against his lips. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." "And I love you," he replied, his blue eyes shining with the certainty of it. "From the moment I saw you limping down that street, I knew I'd never leave your side again." And he never did.